Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. It is G here. I want to get right into this topic. If you don't know, there was a school shooting, and this time it happened to be a 17-year-old Black boy who had been radicalized into white supremacy culture. I've talked a little bit about raising better boys, how boys are basically just raised by society in these streets. This is a sad example of another aspect of raising boys around white people, white supremacy culture, and how they are radicalized in white ideologies and self-hate at a very young age. I am raising two Black boys in a white culture, and I want to talk a little bit about this and things that I pay attention to because it really starts really young with how our kids start to see themselves in these spaces. So guys, subscribe to my channel and let's have a little chat.
The problem is, some of you have never let anyone experience the consequences of disrespecting you.
There's always conversation about how to raise boys. And as mothers, we are actually a huge gatekeeper in what type of men we raise. Now, technically, everybody, women, we have these boys and we raise our oppressors. We raise the men who most women don't want to deal with. So many people have constantly told us it's easier raising boys. It's easier raising boys because we don't raise our boys. We let society raise our boys over and over again. And when we start talking about our children, our Black boys, being raised in a patriarchy, in a white supremacy world, regardless, we see how Black boys idolize whiteness. They idolize the power structure of whiteness and what they can try and get out of it from their position in it. They know they have power as men, but they don't have the same power as white men around them. And when you're raising boys, Black boys, around toxic white men who are on these manosphere planes and on these red pill planes, and they're making themselves victims, all while hating on Black people, Indigenous people, of course this poor child's going to start to hate himself. And not knowing anything about his lifestyle, I'm not saying that he had his own struggles outside of that. I have no idea what this child's lifestyle is, but being in a country that is primarily white, and a lot of people know I'm in Italy, and Italy is not known for its inclusivity and diversity as a culture or a nation. We're raising two Black boys here, and I can tell you how other children behave because of how they're socialized and how we absorb certain things, and we start to teach our children to absorb certain things as normal. And this is something that I pay so much attention to because unfortunately, a lot of things that might just happen with white people, just white people doing white people things and white peopling, when you add people of color in it or Black people in those situations, even when it's not necessarily racial, it can start to seem racialized. And when our children grow up in these things where certain behaviors become normal and it chips away at them over time. And I think our boys, because again, we are not raising our boys, we're letting society raise our boys, because almost every person, no matter what their situation is, they raise boys to meet the standards that are acceptable by the men around them, generally speaking. And this is one of the hugest mistakes that I think we do with our boys, because that's not raising them. That's, again, letting the guide of social structure and what we have come to learn and hate about men. In most instances, women don't like even the men that fathered their children, but then they raise men who end up being just like those fathers. And this is because we're letting the social structures around us raise our boys. When we start talking about how they start internalizing this at a young age, it's not even what you think it looks like. It's not all of these racialized moments where it's like, oh, they called him the N-word or they called him a monkey. Those are the obvious things that happen. And yes, they are hurtful, but it's actually a whole lot of just general behaviors that are just white peopling. But when you put brown and black people in those spaces when this is happening, it's racialized. So I'm gonna give you an example. Um, we have some kids that our kids play with, and they have two sets of caregivers. Okay, so when they're with this one set of caregivers, these kids are beautiful. They play beautifully with our children, everything. However, when they're with these other set of caregivers, these set of caregivers do not really want those kids to interact with our kids. And the kids become very mean, not mean, but very cold and distant. And they just kind of just behave differently in general if they happen to be around when they're with these other caregivers. Now, the ready assumption would be, oh, it's because my kids are black and I'm black. But it's not. It is because they have an issue with that has existed something way before I known, and they're immature and they're rude, and this is just how they be, okay? And they would behave the same way if my children were white, the same exact way, because of their other issues with other people that have nothing to do with us. So when you put kids, however, in this situation, the thing that they're learning, my kids are looking at this and wondering, why are they behaving differently when they're with these other people? And those kids are learning to be duplicitous with their behavior. They get to treat people differently depending on who they're with. Now, me trying to explain this to the adults in the situation, they don't even understand it. Now, adding the whole racial aspect on top of that, my children learning that this duplicitous behavior is okay, which they're not. I am very much telling them this behavior is not okay. And my position is they can't play with them at all if this is the way it's going to be. So even though the adults in the situation don't understand why this behavior is wrong and won't understand why it could also have racial implications for my children, they're supposed to have relationships with these kids in the future as they're growing up. Because first, it teaches these children, you get to pick and choose how you treat people regardless. So if my kids are with these kids and they're older, they're teenagers, and other kids are picking on them, they can side with whoever. They're not being taught how to treat people, basically, and be consistent in their behavior with people. And if I were to allow my children to think that this behavior was okay, this duplicitous behavior, they would start to accept that in other ways as well from other people around them. And again, it can start to play out in racialized ways with our children. And even in their play, I pay attention to so many details of what is happening and how they're responding to the people and the things around them when they're in those moments. Even adults will take larger liberties with your children. And I'm not just talking about them touching their hair inappropriately or whatever. It's, being at the park and they think that they can discipline your children. And I don't mean like spanking, but telling them what to do or without looking for a parent. They think that they have that right. And I have to counteract so many aspects of how I change behavior with my children. I let them talk back to adults, which sometimes means they start talking back to me. But because they're out in this world around these people, they have to know how to have a discourse and to tell people what they think and be comfortable with that. And I have to allow them that space to do it, because if they don't get to practice at home, they're going to be scared to do it out in the streets when they might have to tell people to go fuck off. And I mean, there have been times where I can see that they are building their ground and their stance when they feel like they've been wronged. And I know a lot of times my kids, they know the behavior is wrong and they don't want to be around it. So I think that especially when more, we're starting to have women, Black women, raising children in white spaces and potentially with white families at times. There's so many details that we have to pay attention to for our kids so that they're not being radicalized. Having them around these men, it's just not just white guys that are being radicalized in the manosphere and red pill guys. I mean, and it's not just children. We have adult men. I know men in their 40s who call themselves a part of the manosphere because they don't really have community, and this community feels welcoming to them for whatever incelly reasons. And these communities, and I know there's so many men with daddy issues, and these communities building these ideas and ideologies around these father figures. I saw a grown man, a grown Black man on national television, some news channel, called Donald Trump daddy. He was a grown ass man. He was a grown man, a grown Black man he said daddy is home. He said that out loud on TV about Donald Trump with no shame. He was so happy and gleeful. These people, these Black men who have been raised by white social ideologies, it's just another version of being raised in the streets. And it's just as harmful, it's just as dangerous, it's just as sad as it is when it's hood politics versus supremacy politics. And it's just different versions of the same thing. It's different versions of the same structures of power that Black men want to imitate and emulate to make them feel like they have a place. That's the same thing these incelly white boys are on. And I'm not blaming moms particularly for the outcomes of our boys, but I'm blaming all of us women who continue to raise our oppressors and not pay attention to how society is shaping our boys. We think that they're acceptable if men accept them. We need to change that standard and that voice for ourselves, because we are not doing ourselves any favors by raising and continue to raise men who want to kill us, who hate us, who are not going to be men that other women want to have in their lives. And I think paying attention to what we are doing and how we are letting the social structures raise our boys, while we keep giving our girls tools to survive these men. Even some mothers with daughters and sons raise their boys to be these men while trying to give their daughters all of the tools that they need to survive dealing with the men that they're raising in their house. It's crazy. And I'm telling you, it starts at such a young age when you're raising them in any social structure, but especially around white men, because regardless of the friends that they have, the things that they learn, and now little boys are watching porn as early as 10 or 11 years old. So it's starting so young that we're not paying attention. We're not paying attention, especially if the boys just seem like they're normal and they fit in. A lot of times that's all they're happy about. They're normal and they fit in. Sometimes it's better when they don't fit in. Sometimes it's better when they are on the outside of the structures around them, because not all of these structures are good for them. And I have lots of thoughts and ideas on how we need to address these boys. I talk to my kids whenever something even slightly seems odd in their play when I'm observing them, because I want them to have a voice and I want them to know these things when people treat them certain ways, it's not normal. And they don't have to absorb it. They have the right to tell people this is not okay. And it can be simple things like play. I know one, for example, I had a time with my kid playing with little boy, playing with a bunch of kids, and he was for some reason the only kid that kept getting put on the ground and like toppled on top of over and over again. Now I watched this for a few minutes and I just finally called him over and I'm like, why is this continuous to happen? What is this game? And he's like, well, I keep getting chosen to be like the bad guy or something. And I was like, yep, nope, that's not the way this is going to go. Why are you the bad guy all the time? Do you want to be the bad guy all the time? Like it's just trying to communicate with them in a way that lets them know you are not the bad guy all the time. And if you're the only one who can be the bad guy, you don't like how it makes you feel, tell people that. And it's not okay. And if they don't respect that, you don't have to play with these people. We'll go somewhere else and do other things. And I think that we have to give our kids these powers and our voice and pay attention to them. Pay attention to how this society is slowly shaping them into some of the worst human beings that walk this planet, because that's exactly what's happening. There's an army of monsters being raised on a regular basis, and we can stop and pay attention and have the power to change the social structures around us. We do have that power. And it just comes down to the families of these boys changing the narratives around them and paying attention, because all of these incel teenage boys have no structure, obviously. And a lot of times Black parents think, oh, you're hanging out with little Timmy who has like, mom and dad at home, and mom and dad aren't paying attention. Mom and dad, they are happy little Timmy is in his room, locked away and shutting the fuck up and radicalizing himself. And if your child, your little Black child, is there listening and watching and absorbing this and believing it right along with him, the outcome is obvious. And I'm telling you, it starts when they're little in these spaces. So, guys, I would love to talk more about this. Let me know what your thoughts are. I look forward to talking to you guys in the comments, and ciao, ciao for now.